wait. Oops, I messed it up. Nope, that's wrong. Oh, that's also wrong. There we are. Okay, we're live.
Oh, great. Hello, I see it now. Welcome to, I think it's based on what we have, it's episode 4 of the Pick Our Dang Brains podcast. The last time we were here, we watched a Disney Plus movie, Raya and the Last Dragon. Um, I want to say we both enjoyed that. It was emotional for me. Um, I don't remember. Was it emotional for you too? I
A
don't know.
little
I
bit.
think it was more emotional for me because as a girl, as a girl
Yeah.
in my Asian family, I'm really affected by it. Um, so last night, no, 2 nights ago, we watched Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, under Marvel Studios, as part of the Disney empire. We watched it in the theaters. I had watched it twice in one day, so I watched it early in the morning, and then I called you and said, "Do you want to watch?" And you said yes, and then great, I got to watch it a second time. Um, I almost watched it last night, well, because one of my friends had an extra ticket and said, "Hey, can you come out and watch at 7?" And I said, "No, I don't get off work until 8." So I was very disappointed I didn't get to watch it a third time. So I watched it twice. You watched it once. I guess, I don't know. Let's start with initial thoughts and reactions. I know that for you, you had you planned on watching it? Because I had to ask you if you wanted to watch it.
Yeah, I myself hadn't originally really planned on watching it because I it's not very convenient for me to go out to the movie theater. So I originally was just sort of meh about it, and I missed most of the advertising for it, because I run on ad block and everything. So um, yeah, I wasn't entirely convinced on seeing it. Like I knew it was coming out at some point, but I wasn't really planned on it. Um, so it was a surprise, basically, but it was a very very enjoyable surprise.
Right. Yeah. I don't know if I had mentioned this before, but during the pandemic, I started watching all the Marvel movies in chronological order. So that starts with Captain America and then Captain Marvel and then going up to now because I feel like I watched most of the big movies, like most of the Avengers. I did watch both Captain Americas because I was just following like whatever Thomas wanted to watch, basically. So
Mhm.
there were films that I had skipped and or missed because like friends or whoever didn't weren't trying to go out to watch it. So I was able to catch up on a lot of the middle films of different people and different characters that I wasn't invested in before.
Yeah.
I caught up on like Guardians of the Galaxy. I had missed watching those two films and I watched it during the pandemic. So I think I'm like almost caught up. I think I need to rewatch the Spider-Man films, especially like because of the most recent the most recent trailer of
Mhm.
the next Spider-Man movie makes you want to watch the previous two over again. So
Right.
thanks to Disney Plus. Good job on them for releasing the streaming platform during the pandemic, because then it helped people like me who, we watched the big ones, which is the Avengers, and they were able to catch up
Mhm.
um during the pandemic. So now with Shang-Chi being a Marvel film and coming out as well as being, an Asian American representation film. I guess what are your thoughts on that? Like, as you not being like a diehard Marvel fan like either. Like, I would say I'm not diehard Marvel because I barely caught up this year.
Yeah.
I do enjoy it, but I'm not like I think like you're more versed in like canon Star Wars stuff, and like
Mhm.
I'm more versed in just other things and like not Marvel. So I think we're both kind of on the same level of like being new to Marvel. So what are your thoughts on a Marvel movie superhero that is Asian American?
Well, I mean, the Marvel experience that I had growing up was like 50% X Men and 50% Spider Man. So like the event, yeah, like with the MCU, like Marvel and the Avengers and everything were pretty new to me. I never watched like the old Avengers TV show or anything, and I thought that adding an Asian American character, like a pure, like not quite pure, but a very like authentic Asian character into this roster of super cool superheroes and everything was really great. I remember when the Netflix shows for Marvel were coming out, and again, I didn't really know anything about those characters, but when the announcement was made that Iron Fist was coming out, I remember that I think some people were very disappointed that Iron Fist, this like super martial artist, kung fu master, was going to be played by a blonde, blue-eyed white guy. Um, and the same thing with like the ancient one in Doctor Strange. People were
Hmm.
disappointed that it was a white,
Hilda, yeah.
yeah, a white lady instead of like how it was traditionally depicted in the comics or whatever. Those I could kind of like, didn't really matter to me because I wasn't attached to their original versions anyway, and it seemed like the characters that they played. I mean, I didn't watch Iron Fist, granted, so I don't know if it's like super bad, but I've heard it's okay
Hmm.
as far as Netflix Marvel goes, and yeah, the ethnicity of the Ancient One in Doctor Strange, it doesn't really matter. So there was that. But I was really surprised by Shang-Chi, and just that it really felt um, more than just like it's an Asian person on screen. It's someone that looks like me. That's a superhero. It was more than that because there have been various sort of action heroes in that vein. Jet Li, Jackie Chan, Bruce Lee, Wong on the MCU and stuff like that. But it really felt like an Asian American movie. You could just tell by the way that everyone was acting, and by the production, and by the plot and everything, that it didn't feel like they just cast an Asian guy into the role. It was a movie built around that whole concept, which was super great. The other thing that I did a little bit of research afterwards, and I actually found out that the original comic runs of Shang-Chi are pretty not racist, but like pretty stereotype, pretty. He's a kung fu master. He da 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 da. The it's his the secret name of his unknown father is Fu Manchu. Like,
Oh God.
yeah. So it's like the original comics of Shang-Chi, obviously this was written in like the 80s, the 70s, so they weren't as progressive about their depictions of Asian people back then. But the movie was on the entire opposite end of the spectrum for me. It really felt real. It didn't feel like it was sort of shoved in. It didn't feel like a stereotype, because like Asian guys in action movies, it's like the nerd, the hacker, the spy, the tiny guy that fits in Vince, the kung fu guy. Like it felt like Shang-Chi was really, and all the other characters too, were really their own characters that could stand on their own and weren't just like, the Asian, woo.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Okay. That's great. That's a great perspective, I think, because you're younger, you're kind of experiencing things as like as Gen Z, so you're seeing things that are from 30 to 50 years ago, and you get the visceral reaction of like, oh, this is a little like gross, or this is a little weird, or Fu Manchu doesn't sound right, right? And whereas like I think people of older generations are like, oh, that's a Chinese, like that's a Chinese villain or whatever, like, or that was normalized on TV in the 90s and 80s to see
right,
these evil like villain characters that are Asian depicted in this way, and there wasn't outcry for those things because that is a descendant of the 1800s 1900s Asian anti-Asian propaganda
right,
of like Chinatown era, like the stuff that we know from now, we know from Asian American history and knowing Chinese American immigration history and seeing those political cartoons, and then just seeing the evolution of those from being politicized depictions, in propaganda comic strips, right? World War II propaganda, anti-Asian propaganda, and then seeing that get transformed into mainstream art turning into characters like Fu Manchu, or uh the Asian American actors and actresses getting typecast into these things,
right,
and that being okay, or that being just the norm. So like people of color and minorities, they're typecast into their different ethnic boxes because it's still the Hollywood and the creative arts is still in a structure that didn't allow, or does not allow for authentic depictions of people. It's all stereotypes
yeah,
of people. And then now 2020 is like, it's like think, well, it's about time. It's been 100 years. It's
uh-huh,
been over 100 years of these poor depictions, right? And
yeah,
we're only well versed in Asian American history, because then we can we can look at other communities of how um Latinx Mexican figures were depicted, of their depictions in propaganda and political imagery, how Black people have been depicted ever since enslavement, and how they've been shown in culture, in media, and and now in the creative arts. So with so that's great that you bring up this point of like this movie felt more than just a superhero film for you. It felt more, um yeah, it just felt more for you, and that's great. I'm great that you touched on that. That
mhm,
we're coming off strong with this feeling for you to say that it's more, and it that makes me happy because then you are of this youngest generation. You know what this feels like. You are not like me or like our older sisters who have had to wait 20 years to feel this way, to feel represented, right? I
right,
think there was um one movie that Taichi talked about last night. She said the Joy Luck Club was really
mhm,
impactful to her. And if we look at the Joy Luck Club, it came out before you were born. It came out in 1993.
yeah,
And that was quote unquote a mainstream Asian American film. Um, and it made waves, but the next one that made a significant wave of like an ensemble Asian American cast is Crazy Rich Asians. So it's like there's a whole gap of like 25 years between Joy Luck Club and Crazy Rich Asians.
right,
And and like there's even overlap in some of the acting from those two movies, right?
Right, yeah.
You know, or like of the same, they're of the same community. How come there is this moment of the Joy Luck Club for 90s kids, and they didn't get to experience anything like that until
Hmm.
Crazy Rich Asians, and they're already parents, grandparents of like, oh,
Yeah,
like now it just like, oh, it's almost like a reset button. We have to start over again.
right.
So, um, I bring up like that leads me to kind of the tangent of like a lot of people enjoyed Crazy Rich Asians because of that representation.
Hmm.
And I did, but if I could compare, Shang-Chi's representation story affected me more emotionally and impactfully than Crazy Rich Asians.
Hmm.
One, because I think I'm hyper focused on Asian American representation that is not so polished, cookie cutter, like um like not so perfect or like not striving for perfection, right?
Yeah.
Did you watch Crazy Rich Asians?
Actually, I haven't yet.
Okay. So I would say it's like a not Cinderella story, but yeah, crazy rich Asian. So it's a
Hmm.
girl, regular girl trying to impress her rich boyfriend's family, like
Yeah.
crazy rich, like million billionaires rich. She's
Hmm.
trying to impress them to be as perfect as possible so that she'll let them marry her, right? It's like a yeah, it's like um yeah, so it's like that kind of love story.
Yeah.
But I don't like those kinds of stories because I'm like, why do we have to strive for perfection? Like I'm much more, not rebellious, but I'm more mindful of like, no, I want real, like tough, gritty stories that are actual reflections of who Asian Americans are versus this striving for perfection. Because I feel like that striving for perfection can be like handcuffed with the model minority myth.
Hmm.
So that's why I felt that Shang-Chi was more relatable because like this dude is struggling. He lives in a garage. You know, Katie still lives with grandma and
Hmm.
like in a tiny ass San Francisco apartment with like her whole family.
Yeah.
They're living the real life. They're
Yeah.
living a life that like looks like ours. So of the like Asian American movies that are out right now, Shang-Chi was more impactful than Crazy Rich Asians. So that's like one point I want to get out there.
Yeah.
Therefore, like, I'm glad things didn't stop with Crazy Rich Asians, right? Because things
Hmm.
stopped with Joy Luck Club. I'm glad things didn't stop with Crazy Rich Asians because now we have Shang-Chi. Now we have The Farewell. Now we have more and more films coming out
Hmm.
um, that are more Asian American. Oh, Minari came out and all that. So more films are coming out because there is such a diversity in the APITA community.
Yeah.
So that's why. That's what I wanted to point out for sure. Did you
Yeah.
watch the Joy Luck Club? I know it's from before your
Uh,
time.
I didn't, but it has been on in various occasions when I was at home like 10 years ago.
Uh-huh.
So
Okay.
I had seen it. But I kind of like vaguely know the story.
Hmm.
And you know, I wanted to touch on the point about Crazy Rich Asians. I just recently, like maybe a couple weeks ago, I saw that I think Netflix had a series, like a sort of reality TV, but documentary esque because they're real people about like these. It's like a group of like the top 1% of Asians in like LA that are like these young, like 20s to 30s kids that party all the time. They're multimillionaires. They own companies and all that stuff, and like all the drama that they get into and everything. And you know, thinking about it and thinking about how you were talking about Crazy Rich Asians, I feel like it's sort of like it is the same sort of model minority trap that
Hmm.
is kind of prevalent throughout like film history for Asians because like before Joy Luck Club, in the era of the action movie stars, Jet Li, Jackie Chan, uh, you know, Bruce Lee, and all of them, like yes, Asians were on screen, but they were on screen doing one thing. They were fighting each other. You know, we were kicking ass and taking names. and it was just like that was the block that we got to inhabit. So it wasn't necessarily like, oh, there's no Asians on screen. It's like, yes, there are, but they are in this, like, you're slotted in here, and that is all that, that is all that Asians are, are good for in the cinema. And I think the thing about Joy Luck Club is like it's a very touching story, but like it didn't explode into anything else because it's kind of limited in its scope, and that it doesn't inspire more stories about similar things. Like I could think of some things that are similar in theme to Joy Luck Club. Like for example, immigration out of Vietnam, for example, for our family, or the Hmong people, and how they've been living and all that. But it's like it's not immediately clear to, I guess, the general public. The critical public, I know, very much love Joy Luck Club, but like the general public, there's not a clear line to go off of for that. So that's why I think it kind of like didn't make as much of an impact. And the problem that as much as I have heard that Crazy Rich Asians is a great movie, I feel that there was a possibility that we get put into a new block of like, oh, Asians are super rich and they have this like luxurious lifestyle and they do this and do that, and like, oh, look how fancy they are. And it's just like, yes, that's true for some people, but again, that's like model minority that's taking an entire ethnicity of people that are all very different and sort of slotting them into one thing, that they're one thing. They're rich billionaires and millionaires that go on crazy, wacky adventures and do all this stuff, Kardashian style. Like, that's one story, but there are far more that deserve to be heard and that are far more relatable. And I did really like Shang-Chi's introduction in the movie when we're introduced to the obviously adult Sean in San Francisco. He wakes up and he does push-ups and everything, and we see a fancy ass car pull up to a garage, and a dude comes out and it's not him, and he takes his keys and it's like, oh, have a good stay, sir. And that he's working class. He's got a 9 to 5 just like everybody else. Like he's not Iron Man. He's not a super rich dude. He's a normal guy. Him and Katie are the average San Francisco Chinese descent Asian people. They have their own lives. They have their own joys. And it was really great because I could put myself in Shang-Chi's shoes, even though of course he has a whole superhero backstory and everything. But like in that moment, when he is going through Chinatown in San Francisco and just like walking, headphones on, having a nice time, saying hi to old ladies and stuff, I felt the most at home because I could see myself on that screen. Even though I haven't been to San Francisco's Chinatown, like when I saw the dim sum shops up there, and then like the Chinese market, and seeing an old lady in a cart with a bunch of lettuce, I'm like, this is home. This could have been filmed on Convoy. Like, this is our backyard. And then him going to Katie's house and just sitting around a small ass table with like 7 people. I was like, this is real Chinese people, real Asian people, like how I know them. How this could be you and me, or us and our cousins. Like it's the experience that we've had with all of our friends. It's not like this super polished, like upper class, thing that we strive towards. It's like, yeah, this is us. And I think it's sort of like a mix of the TV show that came out a couple of years ago, Fresh Off the Boat. It's like that same vibe of like, yeah, we do the same things. It's homely because this is how it is. This is what it represents, and I really loved it.
Yeah.
I thought of more, and I wanted to make this comment for the podcast, but you mentioned that some people had said that Shang-Chi is like the Asian man's Black Panther.
Uh,
And honestly, like 100%, I think it's so true.
yeah.
Like obviously, I will never know the extent of what it means for an African American to have Black Panther, but like seeing Shang-Chi on the big screen, like I have never related to any characters more in like my entire movie going experience than I have with Shang-Chi and also with his dad as well. Like those two characters like really I felt connected to. I could sympathize with them immediately. Um whereas before like my favorite characters were always like racially ambiguous but had black hair, so I would like them like Dick Grayson, Robin in Batman. I have a Nightwing shirt because I when I watch Teen Titans, I'm like, I want to be like Dick Grayson. I want to be like Robin because he has black hair and we don't know what his race is, but I think he's Asian and I like him.
I'm
He
just
does
gonna
martial arts. I do
pretend.
martial arts. Like
Yeah.
that's me. That's me. Even though obviously he's a white guy, but like I was like, he has black hair. He's like me.
Yeah.
And then like oh, who else? There was like a Yu-Gi-Oh character that had black hair, like the third show's protagonist that rode a motorbike or something. Like I was like, he looks like me. I like him. Oh, and Ash from Pokemon.
Oh yeah.
I was like, yeah, he looks Asian enough. Like I could be a Pokemon trainer. So yeah, having seeing Simu Liu up there and representing, it felt everything about everything they felt in San Francisco was
Mhm.
like 100% the Asian American experience, and that was great.
As yeah, as we know it, yeah,
Hmm.
as we could relate to it, because like I think we want to reiterate first. I think it goes without saying that the continent is all very diverse,
Hmm.
and there's so many different cultures. But for us, we because we are part Chinese, that we have this affinity with it. We have this heartstring is getting pulled because of
Yeah.
it. So yeah, I think we just launched into what was good about this film is that representation for you, and I'm glad you got to have that, right? Because for me, like even not even when I was your age, it was like there was one show, I just looked it up. It was out in the 90s. It was called The Mystery Files of Shelby Woo. It was like a mid
Hmm.
90s Nickelodeon live action TV show where Shelby Woo was a Chinese American like pseudo detective, like kid detective kind of thing. She was a
Uh huh.
teenager and I remember watching it, I was like, wow, it's a Chinese girl, that's great, but then
Yeah.
it didn't last very long. It lasted a couple years and I didn't really pay attention to that show. I just remember watching it like, oh, there's a Chinese girl on screen. Maybe I could be an actress one day. But then that show disappeared. And
Right.
then, I think we've talked about how I transitioned to just watching animation, like predominantly animation, like really quickly, like was
Hmm.
7 or 8 Pokemon. I remember the first day Pokemon came out because I ran home from school really fast. And you were home, I think it was either like right before you were born or like you were a baby. And I was like, yes, Pokemon. There's a Japanese cartoon because I was exposed to Sailor Moon and then Pokemon came out and I was all into it. And then I just watched animation solely because there was nothing live action that really hit me
Hmm.
except for Shelby Woo, but it had already been canceled by then.
Right.
And I don't remember if there are any other shows that affected me in that way. And then, just because animation, you can suspend your disbelief and like you can just be lost into those worlds, those animation worlds, and I guess it's easier or you get more access to cultural diversity in animation too, because then
Hmm.
right when I was finishing high school was Avatar, and Avatar The Last Airbender is so Asian,
Oh
and
yeah.
that fed the Asian hunger that I had lost in like what or developed when I was in elementary and high school
Hmm.
because yeah, there was for me there was nothing on TV. So um I think going along with what you're saying about Shang-Chi going into Katie's house, I think both our partners said that scene with Katie and her younger brother is a reflection of you, of me and you, because I'm your older sister,
Uh
and where our mom is talking shit, saying like, "Why are
huh.
you doing this stuff?" And we're like, "We're gonna do whatever we want," and we're gonna defy the expectations of the previous generations, and
Yeah.
we laugh at uh, we laugh at the cultural nuances.
Mhm.
We respect them as best we can, but then we also know the context of things, right?
Yeah.
um where we watched the film, we were in a predominantly white neighborhood. In the theater, it was like maybe 10, 15 people, and it was four of
Mhm.
us. And, and I think we were the four people of color,
Uh huh.
and then everyone else was white.
Yeah.
So during specific things, you and I were like laughing like really loud. Like I
Yeah.
noticed it. Like we were laughing, we're like, and then everyone else is like, how is this like why is this funny or something? And I was like, oh shit, this movie is full. This movie is totally for
Uh huh.
Asian people because everyone else was like, Pew! They didn't get it.
Yeah.
Um,
I noticed like I noticed every time I laughed that it was like I could hear my echo because
yeah,
there was no one else laughing. But I think at a certain point I tuned it out because I was just getting
yeah,
so into the movie.
hmm
Um, but yeah, now that you mentioned it, it was like yeah, just every little thing, every little reference, like you could really tell that the director and the writers really cared and really knew what they were talking about. It wasn't like no hate to like John Favreau or anything, but you could tell like John Favreau didn't write this script.
yeah,
It was
yeah.
Asian guys and gals that got together to write this. Like um, everything that you know does just seems normal to the average audience. Really hits home for us. The table, the silverware, um, quickly eating fawn. Like that's how I shovel down
Yeah,
rice when I eat. The white
yeah.
paw, like being obsessed with her deceased husband, is just like ours. uh,
Oh my God.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, leaving out Baitu for
Yes.
for the as soon as she was like saying that she gave Baitu to grandpa, I was like, yeah, it sounds like a that.
Yeah,
That sounds
yeah.
like that story we had with a Thao where he refused to come home until we gave him his Hennessy, and then he finally showed up.
Oh, there's that story. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, when are you getting married?
Yes.
uh-huh. Um, yeah. So just it was great. And the other thing that I really enjoyed was I really enjoyed that they weren't afraid to use a lot of Chinese. Um,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
almost good, like
Is
maybe
it like
not
25%?
I,
20%?
I'd say at least like 30-40% of the dialogue was Chinese. The
Uh-huh.
entire intro was in Chinese, which
Yeah,
was obviously
yeah,
because
yeah,
it was all in China.
yeah.
Um, and of course I did notice like in like the group scenes they in a lot of scenes that would have made more sense to be in Chinese was still in English. Like for example, the ending scene between
Uh-huh.
Shang-Chi and his dad was in
Mhm.
English. Um,
Yeah. Mhm.
so like some things it would have been a little more sense to be in Chinese, but I understand that like it's hard to get you know Western audiences accustomed to the whole
Yeah.
subtitles thing.
Yeah, it's an
Um,
accessibility
yeah,
issue, which,
accessibility.
but quote unquote accessibility meaning like, hey, maybe you should learn how to read subtitles instead of like some people like, I will never watch movies with subtitles, and it's like
Yeah.
you're missing out on the rest of the world if you refuse to read subtitles.
Right.
I actually like I see this. I don't know if you see the chat on your computer, but
Uh,
someone asked GZDR Forev, can you tell us what was going on at the dinner table? Because there seemed to be meta conversation about assimilating to American culture versus traditional culture with the grandmother. So I think I could take this one because
go for it.
okay, so we get there they're having breakfast, which I think that's different for us. Like we didn't eat breakfast in the morning with our family, but we definitely ate dinner. So
Yeah.
it definitely looked like a dinner. Like we could relate to a dinner scene.
Hmm.
But Sean comes in. Oh, he takes off his shoes. That was really important for them to showcase that he takes off his shoes because
Hmm.
your shoes track in dirt and stuff
From the
all over your
outside.
from the outside. You have to leave it by the door in like a shoe area,
Hmm.
and then you just walk with bare feet and your socks into the house because you don't bring the dirt because then it makes your whole house dirty.
Hmm.
So there's there's a whole thing with that of shoes. So like you everyone takes their shoes off. You know, there's when you have a big house party. Um, didn't that happen to May? She got her shoes stolen from a house party at like Bacté's.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
so we were
Because one of the other ladies mistook it for hers, so she took it.
yeah.
Uh,
So that
that's a
happened.
rare occurrence.
Yes.
But
Yeah. So he comes in and he sits down. The mom says, have some Joe while you wait." I think that was an interesting way to pronounce joke and Joe in like I don't know if it was like Hunan province dialect, but you know porridge. So you eat jiao in the morning. You
yeah.
eat the rice porridge in the morning. He's sitting down and waiting. The little brother is there, and she's like, "Oh, you're supposed to be at the shop helping your dad."
Uh-huh.
So they must be a traditional Chinatown family with a business like either nearby or in the neighborhood.
Or
You
downstairs.
know, yeah, so Asian American families are often small business owners or they work for other small businesses to make income.
Hmm.
And this teenage brother, you know, he's Gen Z, obviously wearing his headphones to the dinner table and saying, "Oh, like, well, I need to eat first, like, you know, because like I can't handle it, like I'm
Hmm.
weak." And he's like, "How come Sean can't help me? Because Sean is like an older, he's in his late 20s, he's 30 or something. How come he can't help me? Because he's strong, like he can handle
Hmm.
it." And then Sean being of an older generation and he's being reverential. He's saying, "Oh, I'm happy to help." But the mom cuts him off and is like, "No, it's his job. This is our family business. Therefore, the son needs to go take care of it. They can't, it would be like shameful or like disrespectful if we ask for outside help when
Right.
we have a child there
Hmm.
to is going to maybe inherit the business one day, or at least inherit the skills of the business one day."
Hmm.
So can you speak to that a little bit? Like what was it like working for Baba for a summer? Was
Oh,
it one summer or was it multiple summers?
it was one summer,
Okay.
and yeah, I would say a solid. Uh, you're absolutely right. It's like the matters of the house. You don't ask for help. You don't. You we. It's an idea of the Asian culture of like we need to take care of it ourselves. Um, if we can, if we're able to, then we should. And yeah, working with our dad for a summer, it was interesting. I think for the most part, the jobs that we did didn't require that much like technical help or anything. So it was really me. I was being a typical apprentice. I was carrying his tools for him, giving him the light and everything. Um, but and there were some tasks I was able to do on my own, like installing things. Some simple rewiring that I wouldn't, I couldn't mess up. Um, but it's like it's a pseudo stereotype, but it's also part of the, especially like the sort of Chinese culture of like focus on the work. Because I remember our dad was, even though we weren't doing a lot, when we were just like doing whatever, I was a teenager in high school, so I'd be on my phone, my new smartphone, which I'd just gotten that year. I was playing, some stupid, cookie clicker games, biding my time because I'm spending like 3 hours with my dad going to do work and stuff. And I remember he commented, he's like, yeah, Owen's doing okay at work, but he just keeps going on his phone all the time and like texting and playing games and everything. And it's like, to us, it's like it's like in our culture, it's like we have to keep doing work, like we focus on the work, and like work is the only excuse to like miss a meal with your family or like not be home at a certain time. It's like if you're working, it's fine. If you're doing anything else, it's like you know, because I'm sure you had that experience too, where it's like, oh, if you're of around the son's age, where you teenager, high school or something, it's like you could be out with your friends if you want, but you have to be home by dinner because you can't miss dinner. If you're working though, if you had to pick up a shift and you have to work through dinner, oh, that's fine. You go work, that's fine, make money. But if you're out with your friends, totally different story. You need to come home immediately. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it would have been better, right, in his eyes, if you were like reading electrical engineering theory on your break, you know, or
Yeah,
something.
or I
And
don't know, something like that, or just like, or even just like not doing anything. I feel
yeah,
like not making my mind go somewhere else.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
For you, you're like, oh, I'm taking a brain break now because we're going from site to site.
yeah,
Whereas, whereas, yeah, like he was like wanted you to absorb electrical work, like the
yeah,
whole time. So then
sure.
like the next point after that was so it was the mom asking, "Oh, Katie, did you apply for any jobs so that you can leave the valet job?" And for them to say, "Oh, we like our jobs. Like it's great. Like whatever. We're happy where we are right now and we're content with our work," and the mom being disappointed, and that's in line with like for me, like that is a signal of that striving for the model minority. So like
Hmm.
that mom is of that generation of like the 50s and 60s of like all Asian people have to be super good at school, they have to go to college, they have to get all these degrees, they have to be doctors, lawyers, and uh yeah, what is
Hmm.
it? Doctor, lawyer, and everything else, everything
Yeah.
else in between. They can't be blue collar workers. They can't enjoy their job
Hmm.
if unless it's making them tons of money. So the mom saying that, being having that extra societal pressure of like you have to strive to be the top of the pyramid,
Hmm.
and and um and Katie saying that, Katie like saying like, oh, she's like happy where she's at, and the mom saying like, oh, that's so American of you to say that. But then Katie says, you're American too, mom. So then that signals to me that the grandparents are immigrants
Yeah.
and they raised that the mom in America.
Hmm.
So the mom is right of that generation of like, yes, you may have been born in America, but you were raised to assimilate. You're raised
Hmm.
to um, strive for the American dream.
Hmm.
Right. So like of our parents' generation,
Yeah.
like what was expected of our parents to do.
Hmm.
And our parents are tough business owners trying to strive for like financial stability and security, and then in turn passing on that pressure to their children.
Yeah.
But we are growing up as Americans, and to reject like American exceptionalism and American dream like narratives. We just want to find happiness and find fulfillment in our work regardless of what it is, because
Hmm.
not everybody is cut out to be a doctor or a lawyer.
Yeah.
Do you think we're cut out to be a doctor or a lawyer? Because I don't think I can be a doctor or a lawyer. That's why I'm going where I'm going in my career. Um,
Well,
so
not a
we have,
medical doctor, but you know me, the PhD might be coming. So,
yeah, yeah,
but that again, though, speaking to that point, that's not traditionally that's not what they're talking about either. The
Mm-hmm.
doctor they mean is a doctor in medicine to make a ton
Mm-hmm.
of money.
Sure.
The other thing is like I just realized this as you're restating the scene that Katie mentioning that she likes her job and that her and Sean like their job is that in of itself is like an affront to the tradition because I know I know that the traditional Asian culture is like liking your job has nothing to do with it. It's about you get good at something and you make money about it. I'm sure eventually our parents, given as they are, I'm sure they eventually have some sort of enjoyment in their work, but that's not the point.
Yeah.
Right? The point is making money. The point is to become a business owner so that you make money. Be a doctor or a lawyer so that you make money. Everything else is secondary. And so the idea that she can be happy with what is probably a minimum wage job, if slightly higher, is very alien, very against the tradition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The other thing that I wanted to mention too about it was that it did really seem like the mannerism of Katie was exceptionally striking out against the tradition, especially by not sitting down and eating with everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that was a very clear, like, I don't want to stay with the family. I want to get out of here. I want to do my own thing, which is in of itself against the tradition because, of course, the traditional thing is you sit down, you have a meal with your family, and then you all go your separate ways, unless it's work. Because if you have work, then you're fine. Like that's why the dad's not there. That's why the kid shouldn't be there. The Gen Z kid
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't be
Mm-hmm.
there because he should be
Mm-hmm.
working. But everybody
Mm-hmm.
else, it's like you sit down first, you have a meal with everyone, talk about everything, and then you go. Um, so yeah, I would say it was very much like this whole meta idea of like the tradition of fighting against the being satisfied with where you are and you know and and just wanting to live in harmony rather than like pushing yourself constantly to exceed and to move on to the next step, to keep going in life, which is also part of the it's sort of tied to like why in its own way, rather than Katie's mom, Katie's grandma, why she asked Sean, when are you two going to get married? Because getting married means moving out, means progressing. It means Katie can do something because now she does now it's okay if she doesn't work and becomes a doctor or lawyer or something because now she can be a housewife. Like but
Mm-hmm.
at least she has moved up by becoming exceeded by becoming attached, and all that. Though of course the grandma's message is a lot more innocuous,
Mm-hmm.
um, in that. Also, yeah, the comment that was about traditionalism versus Americanism was because the white Paul, the grandma, the mom's mom, was talking about Gong, her husband that had passed, and um, Katie was mentioning how she thinks that grandpa would have wanted her grandma to move on and enjoy herself and everything, and
Mm.
that was also where after all those comments where Katie's mom says that's such an American concept, is moving on, and I think that is like it's very true. It's like uh, in the traditional culture, it's like moving on from a deceased marriage is more frowned upon, I think, in Eastern culture than it is in Western culture.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I think it's the other stickler and why it relates to the Katie finding happiness in her menial job is the emphasis in the American culture of your own self happiness, your own well being. and yourself, rather than the opposite, which is your family, your obligations, your money, your need to work, your need to support yourself and your family and everything. It's like there is that clash in there
Mm.
that I think is very important. Katie prioritizes her happiness, which is very much an affront to the tradition, as I'm
Mhm.
sure you know very well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so there's like ascribed cultural milestones that are from Asian culture that, you're supposed to be married by a certain age, or if you have a partner, when are you gonna get married? When are you gonna have children? If you're working, are you working to make lots of money? Are you doing a white collar job, blue collar job? Like all of those milestones of like climbing the social ladder, quote unquote, is to get married and have children, and climbing the career ladder means to make lots of money and not do like harder labor, right? Being a valet is a hard is not a yeah, it's not a glamorous job, right?
Hmm.
It's not using her degree, right? Because then like when we see that in the parallel scene of them drinking with their friends,
Hmm.
so I hope that covered the comment in the chat, but in terms of the dinner table scene. But yeah, parallel to that in the drinking with their friends, it was like, oh, you sound like my mom and you kind of dress like her too. And the friend is saying like, well, I've just grown up. It's you can't just be joyriding all the time. You shouldn't be doing that. You should be married, right? Because it's a married couple too that they're
Yeah.
hanging out with, and they're
Yeah.
just two homies, right? They're
Hmm.
too platonic. They're eh, that's another thing. Like you can't have platonic friends of the opposite gender
Yeah.
in traditional eyes because they think you're boyfriend and girlfriend
Hmm.
too. Um, so yeah, so then like you think her friend is a lawyer and she's married and she's grown up and is not joyriding
Hmm.
anymore and is calling out of like saying, "Oh, you have an honors degree from Berkeley, which is super good." And Sean speaks multiple languages. Like they could do more. They could strive for more. Update their LinkedIn and try and get in somewhere entry level, and they could easily climb the corporate ladder that way.
Hmm.
But they've chosen not to. They've chosen to stay grounded, or they've chosen to suppress themselves because I think it goes back to the fear of failure. I think that is more for Katie's like character development. She has a fear of failure
Hmm.
that is addressed with her like archery later on.
Yeah.
Whereas Sean was more of he just one needed to hide in plain sight, basically.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So then, the next like part of the film is I guess the next cultural like setting is going to Macau, right? And
Uh-huh.
finding Shelling and finding the younger sister who was left behind. That's great in that it's cool to see um Ronnie Chang from is he a Comedy Central or Trevor Noah
Yeah.
show? Okay, so from
Yeah.
Tre
He's a stand-up comic.
yeah, so seeing Ronnie Chang in that spot, and I think like I like nudged you, I was because he's like, oh, don't worry, I speak ABC, and I was like, the struggle, ABC being American born Chinese, our Mandarin isn't great.
Hmm.
Our Mandarin has an accent because we didn't, we don't sleep, eat, and breathe Mandarin where
Yeah.
we pronounce things funny.
Hmm.
We
I
pron
feel like there's a need to explain that joke too because like we mentioned earlier, we were the only two people that laughed at that in the entire room.
yeah.
So the when Katie and Sean Shang-Chi go to Macau, they of course they reach the top level to the big fight area, and they meet Ronnie Chang, who starts spitting off Mandarin to Shang-Chi, and they're spin back and forth and everything. And Katie's like, oh sorry, my Mandarin is not good, and he says, oh, no worries, I speak ABC, and So American-born Chinese is the slang term for exactly what it sounds like. You know, Chinese kids like us that are born in America and our grasp of the language is not as great as it could be because we speak English most of the time. We speak English with our friends, Asian or not. We speak English with each other, and we only speak Chinese at the house. And it seems like, and it's especially because in Katie's sense, like you mentioned, she's third generation immigrant. So
Mhm.
it's clear that her grandparents immigrated, and then her parents probably came after, or were born in the U.S. most likely, and then she was born in the U.S. So she is she's 3 generations removed from the source, of China, whereas we are technically second generation, and so it's like, yeah, these are kids that and also the entire conversation between Katie and her mom is in English,
Mhm.
right? So it's like it has gone past the you use Chinese at the house and only at the house, and it is filtered into English is basically everything you say and everything you use except for occasionally with like older folks like the grandma, um, or ordering food or something. Um, so yeah, it was a really it was a really quick joke that, like, yeah, you're right, like nobody else understands except for us.
Yeah.
And so it's in a way it's kind of cool, right? It's like an in joke between us as ABCs.
Mhm.
But at the same time, it's like in a fairly empty theater surrounded by people that are not like us whatsoever. A little bit awkward.
Mhm. What's uh, your description of Katie's comprehension is can be further like analyzed, right? Because when you think about all the times people spoke Mandarin to her, she she could be like you and I, right? Where we can understand what people are saying about us and saying to us
Mm-hmm.
when it's in the right context. So she understood what her grandma was saying in her home. So it's almost like it's her bubble that, she doesn't need a translator in her own home. She like kind of
Uh-huh.
she gets it. She gets like 75% of the words.
Yeah.
Um, but when Shang-Chi, he says that like profound like blood for blood line like in the
Uh-huh.
village,
Oh yeah,
and
the
she
a debt of blood must be paid in blood.
and she's like she's like, what'd you just say? Because like that was probably the first time she ever heard any of those words, and in such a dramatic way. Because I'm sure that was like a proverb, right? Like an
Oh yeah.
eight character, like a 6 character proverb, and he
Hmm.
said it all dramatically, and she's like it's not through the filter of my grandma,
Uh-huh.
saying something at home. So it's like I feel like I remember describing to people of um like my understanding Vietnamese has
Hmm.
slightly improved because I did work in the Vietnamese community for a few years as an educator. So
Hmm.
I learned a lot of words that are of the context of like children talking to parents, of like you have to do your homework and stuff like that, in that context. And then they're like, "Oh, you're Vietnamese, like." You're like you can speak a little bit. I'm like, oh yeah, like I only know how to like speak this way, and I speak with grandma. Like that's it.
Hmm.
Like grandma taught me Vietnamese, but any other scenario you drop me somewhere else of like give us a public comment about redistricting in Vietnamese, and I'm like, no, I can't do that. you know but put me in like a school setting, and I need to talk to a parent and tell them that your kid did not turn in his homework, where's his homework, then I can say, oh yes, I can
Hmm.
do that.
Yeah.
Or put me in front of someone's grandma who
Hmm.
is also Vietnamese, like, oh hello, like I'm Vietnamese too. My family's from this village. What village are you from?
Uh-huh.
Like that's
What do you
that's
like to
it.
eat?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's like, oh yes, I'm this old. I'm married, or like my parents came from here, and like my parents came in this year and stuff like that. So,
Hmm.
um, I don't remember her speaking Chinese.
No,
So
never.
she could be like many kids, like I don't. I don't know if Taichi's gonna hear this, but Taichi's Vietnamese is really bad. So, but Taichi can hear it. She can
Uh-huh.
hear it, and it kind of hears what's going on, but
Uh-huh.
she can't say anything. You know. So
Yeah. I
so
mean,
she,
yeah, me too. That's
yeah.
how I feel
Oh
too.
yeah. So it's
My
like
pronunciation is terrible
yeah, yeah.
for
So
my.
you and Taichi like can hear and like you can tell when someone's talking about you.
Mhm.
Oh, like when like Ane cornered you a couple months ago, and
Oh,
you
yeah. Hmm.
so she like cornered you in that bedroom
Uh
and like
huh.
lectured at you for what, like 10 minutes
Yeah.
about life
Uh
and
huh.
stay in school and don't play around and
She just.
but you got it, you understood it,
I
but you're
understood
just
the general gist, but only like any every other word, and it doesn't help that it was a stressful situation. Just literally boxed into my room. I have nowhere to go. It's my grandma. I can't like push her out the way or something, so I just have to sit there and hear her. I knew she was repeating herself because she kept saying the same things, and I got the general gist of what she was saying. But I was like, man, what the hell? Like, what is this? I don't. Yeah, so I mean I sympathize with Katie
yeah.
100% because that's
Yeah.
that's the that's really how it feels. It's like if you're in your element, like yeah, you can get it, but
Hmm.
get put in a situation that you don't expect and you
Yeah.
can't hear it.
Yeah.
Especially with Shang-Chi saying that line, it's to put it in perspective for other people, it's like it's as though you were talking to your friend. If English is your, even if English is your first language, but let's say it's your second language, if you could just talk to your friend like this, right? You could have a normal conversation, and then if all of a sudden they quote Shakespeare at you,
Mm.
and they go, you know, doth not wander on her lips, and you just go, what did you just say? I don't. What?
Four
or,
score
or
and 7 years ago,
yeah,
you know.
or like Chaucer even, or just like
Yeah.
some dramatic quote, and just what? Like
Yeah.
you can't get it, or you know, same thing if someone uh, you know confronts you and starts speaking like really technical speech or whatever. Like it's very you're not gonna understand. But
Mhm.
for
Yeah.
most of the time, and I think it was very clear that Katie, even though she doesn't respond in Chinese,
Mhm.
that when people are talking to her in Chinese, especially in Talo, in the
Yeah.
village, like
Yeah.
they only speak Chinese there. But when they talk to
Oh, that's
her,
right. Yeah.
she understands.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's all the old people.
yeah.
All the old, like the old lady who was making her shoot stuff, and then Guangbo,
Hmm.
and he was saying stuff, and she's like, I get it. It's through the old people filter. It's like
Yeah.
your elder filter, and you just like understand it a little bit
Hmm.
better, right? That
Yeah.
you just it gets translated in your head subconsciously, and you're like,
Uh-huh.
I'm just gonna follow, and like
Uh-huh.
I'm just gonna let my instincts take me.
Yeah.
Um, I noticed that, at the, I think we're going ahead, right? Because then the dad captures them,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Tony Leung, he captures them, and then at the dinner table, he's like, American girl, like, what's your Chinese name? And then she had to look at the sister to get like confirmation of like, go ahead, tell him your name, it's fine. And then
Hmm.
she's like, okay, like Ray Wen,
Hmm.
like that was it. Because then that is like a lot of kids of
Yeah.
like, do you know any Chinese? I know how to say my name, you know?
Hmm.
Like, I know the dishes I want to eat at dim sum,
Yeah.
I know how to say my name, and that's it, and that's the extent of it. Because you're right of like we fall into sometimes culturally people have fallen into, and like us too, we've fallen into the model minority trap of like you have to have perfect English to succeed.
Hmm.
But then when you're at home, you have to have perfect Chinese somehow too.
Yeah.
It's like how like it's rare to be perfectly bilingual.
Hmm.
Um and so it's like so it's so it's really interesting in terms of um in seeing that language difference between Katie. Like she's American, so like her generation would be like Joey, like the
Hmm.
the kids generation, right?
Yeah.
The only kid who's going to be bilingual is Max, is because he was fully raised in a like non-English environment.
Yeah.
But like I said, he's picking up English really quickly because he's getting immersed in preschool.
Hmm.
So we'll see like how if he can retain like Vietnamese moving when he goes into primary school, because it depends on how long, our cousin's parents are going to be around to like only talk to him in Vietnamese. So
Right.
we'll see, because then there's also, will our siblings who have children, are they going to send their kids to language schools?
Hmm.
Like yes or no, that's the choice, right? Because
Yeah.
I feel like all of us have neutral to negative experiences with language schools.
You guys
So
do. I never had to go, so
that's true. Yeah, yeah.
I think I'm the only one with a positive experience in that regard.
Oh
since
yeah,
since
because
my
you
math
got a
taught me.
private, because you had a private teacher. Yes,
Yeah.
that's true. Yeah, so learning language that way, like learning language in a school sense, or learning the family language as an extracurricular activity that's not going to count for your grades
Hmm.
or anything like that,
Yeah.
but the purpose is to keep up culture and keep up, perfection, right?
Right.
Um, I don't know if, do you see this other comment?
Oh.
This other question? So he's asking, or GZDR Forever is asking, can you explain Shang-Chi's family dynamic? It seems the father favored Sean in teaching martial arts and wanted nothing to do with the daughter. What is the girl's role in traditional Chinese family in China versus American versus like it? Yeah, I mean, like,
Go ahead. This is all you.
um, well, I think one, yes, it's culture, but people could probably argue that Wenwu chose to only focus on men is because he's from the Middle Ages, right? They say he's at least a
Mhm.
thousand years old. So if he's
Yeah.
1,000 from the year 2020,
Mhm.
then he is like, from the year, yeah, 1100s, which is like, and I don't know what dynasty we were in the beginning. The first appearance of Wenwu, like
Yeah. It looked like Three Kingdoms to me.
Three Kingdoms.
It
Okay.
looked like Three Kingdoms. At least in that sort. It could have been Han Dynasty, but it looked vaguely Three Kingdomsy. Um,
Wait, if we do 2020 minus 1,000, it's the year 1,000. Three Kingdoms is 200 AD.
okay.
So the year
Yeah.
1,000 would be Song Dynasty.
Song Dynasty.
Uh-huh. Song Dynasty is before the Yuan Dynasty.
Okay.
And did you catch that? So I would say we're not experts, but we're like okay and versed in like understanding the different phases of ancient Chinese like dynastic history.
Uh huh.
So just to like give context to everyone in the chat. But yeah, like um yeah, did you catch the name thing of he's like, "Oh, I've had many names, one of them being Master Khan," or he like great conqueror, like the man who controlled everything, and then one saying Master Khan.
Uh huh.
So which makes sense in that if we go by the actual year, he could be either Northern or Southern, Song Dynasty, Western Xia Dynasty, um, Western Liao, Jin, and then either one of those would
Hmm.
be precursor to Yuan Dynasty. So for sure, if they are referencing Master Khan, then yes, it would be Yuan Dynasty.
Yeah.
Um, but just the dynasty of his first dynasty of conquering,
Hmm.
um, the one that was depicted, right? Like of that kind of battlement. We just don't know what the context of that space is, or
Yeah.
if they just thought general Silk Road conquering, maybe con stuff, maybe not.
Yeah, I think that was. I
Ta-da.
think that was probably more the point. Is like
Mhm,
it showing something that looks vaguely ancient, and then
mhm.
having them happen. Because it's like I don't remember the opposing side having any specific banners or anything. I'd have to. Well, we'd have to watch it again
Mhm,
to
mhm.
like pay attention to that scene.
they
Um,
looked Western Asian or more like, more like of the Caucasus, right? Of like
yeah,
that
like that.
the other side of the Silk Road basically.
Yeah,
So like of non-Han people,
right.
non-Han Chinese people. So that, so it could be, yeah, like the outskirts of Yuan dynasty.
Yeah.
Where the Khanite, the Mongolian dynasty basically of Kublai Khan and um Great Khan became ruled over what is now China, but then it spread all over the continent all the way to
Hmm.
was like the western border. Was
Yeah.
like almost Europe, part of
Yeah. Of
part of
course. Of course.
part of yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
basically part of Europe. So,
Um, but anyway, back to the original question.
oh yeah,
I
yeah.
think
So,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, part of it is definitely due with his age, but I think the other thing is like, and we can kind of see it in the mannerisms that they have the kids act when they have the flashback sequences. It's really, I would say it's really more of and I guess it comes across differently, but I would say it's really more of Sean is the older one. Shang-Chi is the older. He's the elder brother, so it's his duty to to fulfill, his father's legacy and to protect his little sister and everything. And we can see that, like in the flashback when the flashback with the mom getting attacked, we can see that like Shang-Chi is told to protect your sister, and then he puts his arm in and takes her inside and everything. Um, so I definitely it has in the traditional role of the Chinese family, it's definitely because you are the eldest, so you have the most responsibility. And the other thing about I mean, the explanation that we get in the movie is like, oh, the master doesn't want to see his daughter because he reminds him of his wife. Yeah, but at the same time, I do think that there is like an inherent um, there is definitely an inherent sexism in tradition in like the tradition of Chinese culture of women being expected um, to be housewives, to be more subservient, to not necessarily go out and do this whole martial arts thing, this whole
Mhm.
conquering thing, this whole assassination thing.
Yeah.
Um, so I think, but at the same time though, I think it is not as I think it's not as important as people think it is. Like we talked about this when we were reviewing the Disney Mulan,
Mhm.
how like Mulan in the new Mulan movie, the live action Mulan movie, it was like, oh, Mulan is not allowed to use her chi, and she shouldn't do this because she's a woman, and she needs to focus on being married and all this stuff. And I think it like even though inherent, we do understand a lot of the traditions of Chinese culture are sexist in that way. It's not quite like that. That's more of a sort of an imagining by placing the Western society's understanding of sexism and misogyny and patriarchy onto China, where it doesn't really exist in that way. Same thing with like the witch in Mulan. That there's no such thing in China. In China, witches don't exist.
Mhm.
You can
Yeah.
use magic, but it doesn't make you. There's no word for witch in like the 100,000 characters or whatever. It's an
Mhm.
alien concept. Um, so I think in that regard, that's more of the touching stone of like of what was going on in that. but I think at the same time, though, there's definitely an idea, at least in in the traditional Mulan story, of course, that women don't fight. Women are not combatants. Women don't fight
Yeah.
wars. They're not
Yeah.
warriors.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's probably the sort of secondary reason behind Xiaoling's not being able
Yeah.
to fight and to train with her brother.
Yeah.
Besides the whole like blood debt that Shang-Chi owes his
Yeah.
dad for like
Yeah.
not protecting his mom
Yeah.
and everything.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Um,
think I think I'm I like I hear your reasoning, and I think I'm going to, I guess, not combat it, but reiterate that it is a symbol of like patriarchal societies, right? Because I mentioned Wenwu's age is because he's from like old dynastic China, where it has been a patriarchal society for thousands of years, and yes, women were lower class people in that they were either childbearing or provide sexual services. You
mhm,
know, girls were married off into families for wealth, etc., and to make alliances, whereas the men and the boys were the ones who inherited the power and the title and the status.
mhm,
So, so yeah, it was their choice to make it a boy as the oldest and then protect the girl, but then show her as the rebellious girl who is not going to be tied down by the patriarchy,
mhm,
right? And then we get that confirmation when she is in Talo and like their more egalitarian village sector
mhm,
treats women in that way, you know, and then that is probably one of the main things about gender norms and the patriarchy. That was their mother smashed that for the father
yeah.
during his life, so that's why he was able to relinquish his rings and like try and live a normal life because his wife had showed him the way of like being more equal. Because we hear
Mhm,
from Xiaoling when she and Katie are talking in the room of like, has he always treated you like this? Like the treated you like so shitty? And she's like, only after my mom died. So before, you know, before she died, then he was more, you know, more caring, more equal, and not in less the traditional dad who like puts his daughter in her place kind of thing, or like enforces these gender norms on her. Let's and Because the wife was there to remind him to do that.
mhm,
But because of what happened, then he goes back to his old ways,
yeah.
you know, his old ways, his old traditional patriarchal ways of like men have to fight for their family, or men have to go out men have to go out, like his son, because he's the oldest son, he was also the witness to it. His son has to go back and avenge the mother's death
Mhm,
to the other person, not the daughter, because the son was there, the son witnessed it, and the son is a male and he's the oldest child.
right.
So I think that was probably the choice in terms of making Katie an older sister to
Mhm,
further highlight the difference, because Katie is an older sibling to a
mhm,
younger boy. Um, there's still the gender norms there of the boy is helping out with the family business,
mhm,
but it's also possible that she probably had to help out with the family business when she was a teenager too, until
yeah.
she went to college to get a degree, and then they expected her to use her degree and get a real job, but
Mhm,
then she decided to stay home and work as a valet. Then they're like, "Oh crap," you know, like now we have a child who wasted our money on this degree and she's not doing this. Like she's gone off the path.
mhm,
She drove the train off the tracks in terms of her trajectory,
yeah.
because now they're seeing, and then I think that now that's why they also have extra pressure. They're putting extra pressure on the son, the younger brother, to go to work immediately. But because he's Gen Z, he's like, no, I need my vitamins, you know, like, you know,
Yeah.
before I can go to work. So that shows the key, that shows the contrast, right?
Yeah.
Sean is an older brother. to a younger sister. Katie is an older sister to a younger brother. Like Sean and Katie being two very different older sibling dynamics.
Hmm.
Sean was raised like before his mom died. He was in a peaceful, tranquil time of just their family. But
Hmm.
after his mom died, he was thrown into a patriarchal structure because the father only had male warriors
Right.
too, right?
Hmm.
He only had male warriors and like forbid her from participating. And that only furthered the sister wanting to be as hardcore as possible in her
Right.
fighting,
Yeah.
because she was forbidden from doing that.
Hmm.
And then Katie is not only Americanized, but because she's an older sister. And I feel like the parents have more. I would want to say maybe the parents could be in a state of mind of they've given up on her because she's older, but she's failed or missed all these milestones.
Hmm.
So they're putting more chips into the younger brother to hopefully, because he's younger, we'll be able to catch him and make him do what he's supposed to do.
Hmm.
Because the older sister is totally off the beaten path already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would like to make the point though that the difference between Xialing and Katie does very much highlight the difference between like treatment of the daughter in the traditional, you know, old traditional Chinese culture versus the Americanized version. Because yeah, it's true. You know, Xiaoling, even after Shang-Chi leaves and is gone, we don't know what Xiaoling is up to, but it's very clear like her dad didn't go to train her to be an assassin. Now he just didn't care about her. So it's like, you know, that she's basically worthless, and that she's invisible. Whereas with Katie and the more Americanized, you know, sort of Chinese culture that she's in, um, like yeah, they are trying to push her brother, but you know, it's still she still has a support network. Her mom is still like, hey, did you apply for new jobs? You know, still trying to push her, still trying to. It's not like, you know, oh, you're a lost cause, or even worse, like because they have a son, the daughter doesn't matter anymore, sort of
Mm,
idea. Um, Instead, it's just like, yeah, you know, you're still our child. We still want you to succeed. Whereas for Xu Wenwu and his son Shang-Chi, it's like once the boy's gone, it doesn't matter. You know, it's like that was my successor, and now he's gone.
hmm
He doesn't have any intention to train Xialing to wield the Ten Rings. It's always like if you want these, you have to earn them to Shang-Chi and
hmm
Shang-Chi alone.
hmm
So
Yeah.
yeah, there was a definite like culture divide
hmm
in those two characters.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and even like getting off the helicopter, right, with the kids returning, he says, "My son has come home." So it's like, like he's still just and
uh
take those girls to their room, like,
right. It's like
even though, yeah,
my heir is here,
yeah, yeah,
and the
Crown
others.
Crown Prince is here.
Uh
Prince Zuko has come home,
huh.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I made, I made the content comparison of like, is this Zuko fighting Fire Lord? um, Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender fighting Fire Lord, his father, who's super evil. Um, his sister is Azula. She is super badass and everything, but she's like getting underestimated by everybody.
Mhm.
Um, so we'll see. We'll see what happens with her too.
Yeah.
Do we feel like we've covered everything that's good about this movie?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Yeah.
No, I could go on forever,
Yeah,
honestly.
yeah, definitely.
Um,
Um, yeah, we have hit an hour and a half. So, yeah, is there any, I think if we want to touch on any criticisms we have, and then maybe at the end we'll think about like final points that we like want to nail home. Otherwise, we're gonna talk here and have a 24-hour stream talking about this.
that's true. Um, I think that in my opinion, the only criticisms I can think of right now is like I feel like the whole gender role argument between Xiaoling and her dad. Um, I feel like there was content there that maybe could have either it could have been touched on more, or maybe lessened, in my opinion, because I think it because it is very unclear, like, exactly what's going on, because we get the explanation from Xiaoling that's like, oh, I remind him of my mother, that's why he doesn't want to look at me. But also we get, the example from Talo, where um, the aunt is like, everyone trains here equally. It's not just the boys. So it's like it's unclear, kind of like what direction exactly they're going for. I feel like it could have it if its inclusion was good, but I think it could have been more clear, because it's very murky how he feels. Yeah, and the American girl, like, statement. It's like, is it sexist? Is it, because of her ethnicity, because she's not full Chinese? It's like unclear exactly what the path is. And I think also part of that is also because the father is like, sort of almost a villain for most of the movie. Like especially when they're having the dinner, it's like he's trying to get them to sympathize with him. So like the reveals that the movie does don't paint him as much of a villain. But yeah, it's like, I think it could have been done a little bit better and a little bit more clearly.
Mm.
The other thing was the the whole the Dweller in Darkness and the soul sucking monsters at the end. That didn't matter. Like,
Hmm.
I think the idea that uh, Xu Wenwu is being, like, triggered by the voice of his beloved to do this thing and to be evil again and to conquer and to burn, like, that concept in of itself was great. But the everything else, like the soul eating bats and the Dweller in Darkness, wasn't really that meaningful in of itself. It just seemed like a generic villain for the movie. And I think, like, I understand the point, because it's like, the point is that Shang-Chi can forgive his father, but his father, literally needs to pay for his crimes by realizing the evil that he's done, and being killed by it. And that Shang-Chi, even though he declares that I'm going to kill my dad, that he can't, because he's a hero and he's going to
Hmm.
spare him.
Hmm.
So of course he can't be the final villain. But
Yeah.
like the Dweller in Darkness, the soul eating vampire bats things, they didn't matter. They could have been anything. And I think
Hmm.
it was a missed opportunity to be something more impactful in some way. Like, if they were, something that a villain that the father knew about, but that he, got that he knew about before, and he wouldn't have done this before, but because he's so driven by madness for his beloved that he falls for their trap anyway. Or
Mm.
like, or being like, maybe another mythological Chinese villain of some sort, like
Hmm.
a Chinese demon, or some sort of corruption or something.
Hmm.
The actual soul sucking stuff was, it was all right. It was tension.
Yeah.
But the creatures themselves, I feel it was that was the moment when those things came out, when I stopped seeing the movie as its own thing and like super Asian, super Chinese American movie. And when those bat things came out of the cave, I'm like, oh, it's a Marvel movie.
Hmm.
Oh, they're fighting a gray blob of something. Oh, there's a
Yeah.
big
Yeah.
monster, big CGI
Yeah.
monster that they're gonna do
Yeah.
some magic
Yeah.
CGI shit too.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
yeah.
I think the answer to both is because it is a thing, it's one movie in the Marvel universe. We will get those answers in other things, right? The
Yeah.
Ten Rings, her taking over the Ten Rings Empire, will
Mm.
get answered sometime in either a movie or a TV show.
Uh huh.
And I think because you're still catching up on all the Marvel TV shows that are on Disney Plus,
Uh huh.
that and like did you finish Loki, right?
Yeah.
So there and with the two end credit scenes after the last one, like they're saying maybe that beacon is a clue of like other multiverse stuff,
Hmm.
multiversal things, the monsters, because like Talo was another dimension technically. It was a portal to another dimension, is a portal to another universe, another, what is this? There were no TVA agents there, of course, but
Hmm.
it was like some kind of anomaly in on Earth that leads to another world, another dimension. And then that in the dark portal is a portal to another world and another dimension of space, time, whatever,
Hmm.
that monster being of that kind of realm is because it's going to tie into the multiverse later.
Right.
And then the story of Xiaoling's tragic childhood of like the time when Shang-Chi left, and then her building up her empire in Macau, like I want to see that backstory or
Yeah. Uh-huh.
in flashbacks, right? And I want to
Hmm.
see her take over Ten Rings now and like into what it is now.
Yeah.
We will get that fleshed out in some other content. So that is, you're right in that it is kind of that is a flaw of some of these films is
Hmm.
like it's only one part of a whole thing
Right.
versus being a standalone film. Um, like and then now we got the Iron Man 3 villain. We
Uh
got
huh.
Trevor Slatter, we got freaking Ben Kingsley in the movie to repent for his, Asian yellow face sins
Yeah.
in Iron Man 3
Yeah.
in this movie, and like so you have to watch all this content. You
Hmm.
have to watch Doctor Strange and like Infinity War to know who Wong is
Right.
and why we love Wong, and it's like yes, like the one other Asian guy in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we have to have him in this movie,
Hmm.
and he makes a substantial cameo,
Hmm.
in both the film um in the film and in the end credit scenes too.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and his story and his powers are going to be his powers and his influence is going to be the ones holding Shang-Chi and Katie's hands into the circus, as
Yeah.
like Bruce Banner called it.
Hmm.
So I would say that is a fault, a flaw, like that's why that it has to go that way, because there's more creative content to look
Hmm.
forward to, so you
For sure.
can't watch it as a single package, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and like so I had dinner with Tai Chi last night, and she is not caught up at all. The last movie she saw is Civil War, so
She
she
hasn't
hasn't
seen Infinity War or Endgame.
no.
Oh, jeez. Okay.
Or Ant-Man. She would totally love Ant-Man because she
Uh
likes
huh.
Paul Rudd.
Uh huh.
And she hasn't seen Thor Ragnarok.
Uh
And
huh.
I don't think she's seen Guardians either. So she is so behind.
Yeah.
And it's like, you have Disney Plus, just watch it.
Uh huh.
So, you know, I told her that she would like it, and she was the one who brought up, oh, Joy Luck Club was impactful because that came out when she was in high school.
Hmm.
Um, the next comment in the chat, I think we're just gonna keep going. The trailers made it seem like Xu Wenwu was a gangster bad guy who wanted his son to take over the business, and his son refusing, calling him a murderer after watching the movie. I don't know if he was a bad guy. So I think you mentioned this. And do we compare him to Thanos? So you had mentioned this of like he was a bad guy some of the time, but not
Hmm.
all of the time. Yeah.
Yeah. I think for one, he he's no Thanos. Uh, but that's a whole different sort of debate on like that's for the YouTubers on their like villain scaling charts and all that. But I would say undoubtedly he is a bad person, but in the sense that like Genghis Khan is a bad person, right? Henry VIII is a bad person, William the Conqueror is a bad person, Constantine's a bad person.
Mhm.
That he comes from Shu Wenwu comes from an era of conquerors and empires and kings and conquering and all that. So it's like it's not un. I wouldn't say he's necessarily definitively evil for that reason. For what he does in the prologue. And I would say that like it's kind of unclear the scale of exactly what he does because we're told that the Ten Rings is like the Illuminati; it secretly runs the world, right? But
Yeah.
we don't see exactly what that means, and I think that's on purpose
Mm.
because one, it's a mystery, and two, it's like they're powerful, but after a certain point, he got bored of just like creating a world empire, and instead he's running
Mhm.
it from the shadows, and like just if stuff happens that he doesn't like, then he'll kill somebody
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
stock market crash or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, and I haven't actually seen any of the trailers for Shang-Chi, but I will say that the murderer comment is totally like I think it's done that way to psych the viewer out because the
Mm.
first impression we get of Shang-Chi after he reveals himself to Katie is
Mm.
that he doesn't go through with the assassination. It
Yeah.
paints Wenwu as like this hyper bad guy. I'm going to train my son as an assassin. I'm going to have the slave master whip him and make him, do this hardcore training and everything. And it doesn't show us the context until later that, like, uh, Shang-Chi kind of accepted this, like, he wanted to become powerful to avenge his mother's death, and that he did actually do it. And we
Mm.
see hints of it throughout the movie that Shang-Chi himself is actually has as the his aunt and Talos says, like you have all of your father, the good and the bad. So
Yeah.
we see Shang-Chi get angry. We see him when he's fighting the Taskmaster in Macau. We see that he before he like does his finishing move. We see him go through all of his memories of all of the like terrible stuff that he did.
Oh, you
Um,
mean Death Dealer? Yeah.
oh yeah, Death Deal. I didn't know he had a name.
Yeah.
Uh, that,
Taskmaster is in Black Widow.
yeah, I just because he has a whip, so I was like, yeah,
Yeah.
I know he's not Taskmaster, but
Yeah.
the guy with the whip,
The
that
guy with
walked,
the mask
yeah,
again.
the guy with the mask that walked like a spider.
Yeah.
And then we see like he's about to stab the dude in the face
Yeah.
before when stops him with the Ten Rings, and we keep seeing hints of Shang-Chi like he's willing to take lives. He says I'm gonna kill my dad. Like
Mhm.
there's no I'm gonna disarm him and take the Ten Rings. Like I'm gonna kill my dad.
Mhm.
That's the only way to solve this. And we see that as a kid, he was perfectly accepting of his dad going on a killing rampage for his mom. It made sense to him, and
Mhm.
it gets revealed that he did kill the guy that killed his mom. Like he
Mhm.
did go through with it. He only ran because he was afraid. He was afraid of everything else, and obviously he's also 14 years old and committed a murder. So like that psychological trauma made him run away. Um, and so I think it's a contrast that is a misleading contrast for that sets up the movie itself, in that it's like Shang-Chi might say, I hate you, you're a murderer, but really inside he feels the same way as his dad, and him and his dad are on the same level and they understand each other. And what sets them apart is not that he doesn't kill, and when he does, it's that he can see that there is more to it. He's not blinded by his rage, blinded by his need to save his mom, his or his, for Wenwu, his beloved. That he can see that there's more to it, and that it is a very big character moment for Shang-Chi when he has the Ten Rings and is fighting his dad, that he has the opportunity to kill his dad, and he doesn't. He forgives him. he throws them on the ground and he says, this is I want to do this," and he separates himself from that lineage. So ultimately, I think I Wenwu is definitely a very sympathetic villain. He's certainly a villain in the movie. He does a lot of things that are morally reprehensible, but it's he. There's a purpose to the madness, and though he obviously is, he if he was alive, he would need some serious psychological help because he's going through some major trauma from losing his love of his life. But I think at the end of the day, he's like he was redeemable, and I think definitely Shang-Chi saw it that way. That it's like you're a bad person. You've done these things, but I understand why you're doing them. That's why I don't want to kill you because you are my father, and you have family. You have me. You have my sister, and we still need you. Like his last words to his dad is, "We need you, not your evil. Is we need you." And I think that rings true because like as much it's kind of like it's funny. It's almost like one of the Pro ZD videos where it's like he's a villain but he's a great dad.
Oh,
At least
yes.
to yeah, at least to Shang-Chi, because like yeah, it's true. Like he everything he does has a purpose. Like yeah, he kind of just throws people's lives away on a whim, but he's not a terrible person. Um, and I would say in a way it's similar to Thanos and it's similar to Zemo, and that they are not just blank slate, like we are evil because we are evil villains. It is definitely more like there's a purpose, there's a drive to what they do. In a way that a lot of the Marvel villains kind of fall flat on, because it's like, I'm thinking back to Marvel villains. Um, Loki is complicated because Loki, and also because Loki, but we get a lot of Loki's character development, obviously, in Loki. But like Killmonger kind of falls flat. Like you get it, his dad got killed because of Wakanda, but at the same time, it's like his dad gets killed, and so now he wants to go on a global genocide, and there's a disconnect. It's like that doesn't line up. That there's a different scale there, and he kills innocent people. Um, what else? Whiplash goes after Iron Man because his dad got ripped off and didn't get credited by Howard Stark, and so he goes off and again kills innocent people just to get at Tony Stark. Um, and yeah, that's the ones I can think of right now. But even though Shu Wenwu like is evil and does commit evil acts, everything he does seems to have a coherent purpose. He doesn't just do it for the hell of it. At least after Shang-Chi and Xialing are born, like he only says to attack Talo after they refuse to let him go through the gate, because obviously he believes that past the gate is his wife, and that's why he's like, there's no other way to do this now. We have to fight. Um, and like he's got some real like Tiger style parenting by sending assassins after his son. But again, it's like in his mind he's doing right because it's like, I have to resharpen my son's skills after 10 years, and they're not going to be able to kill him. I'm not actually trying to endanger their lives because
Yeah.
I know they're too good for that.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I really related to Wenwu. In a way, I could really sympathize with him because, like, the story, it makes perfect sense. It's like, he lost the love of his life that changed his entire life around, and he goes crazy basically because of it. Like, it's completely understanding. Also, I did look it up, and Wen is actually it is my name. It's the same
Oh.
character. So I was a little bit to it too, but
Mhm.
but yeah, um, he's a in the story sense he's a villain, but I think he's definitely not like a super bad guy. Like he's not a genocidal maniac. He has a drive and he's trying to do it in what he thinks is the best way, and he's crossed the bar and he's lost his sense of what is appropriate. Yeah.
Okay,
Uh,
great.
did
That's
you have
yeah.
any criticisms or closing thoughts before I get lost in it?
Yeah, you get lost in the sauce. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like yeah, we really could go on.
Hmm.
I don't know if you're down for a part two later in the week because we haven't yet talked about what it was like in the mom's village, right? Because then now we can make comparisons to parental uh, uh like father lineage and then mother lineage, and there's like
Hmm.
cultural comparisons on that, because
Yeah.
then um like for one the I would say yeah, like I agree on the criticisms of like this was a this these extra story elements that are basically teasers for other films
Hmm.
is other films and other content is a flaw that makes it less of an impactful single film.
Hmm.
But that can be taken as a good thing because then I'm like excited. I'm jazzed for for Xiaoling to take over, and I want to see everything that's
Yeah.
about her. Like if my hairstyle is like hers in 3 months when I get my hair cut, like don't be surprised, you know, if I change my hair to her hairstyle,
Uh-huh.
right? I think one of the I think you had mentioned this earlier of like there were some parts that I wish were in Chinese because
Hmm.
I know that we understand Mandarin
Yeah.
okay, like we understand it, we grew up around it, or we grew up around our heritage languages enough to be
Hmm.
like, okay, there's certain conversations that are just more impactful emotionally
Hmm.
in our heritage language versus English, right?
For sure.
There is that is it code switching, like the
Hmm.
linguistic term of like code switching of like
Yeah.
when our parents are talking to us and then all of a sudden if you hear May say like your name in Chinese, and then continues her sentence and you're just like, oh, it's real serious now versus like, Vincent, do this, wash the dishes, and then it's like, oh,
Yeah.
温故,
Uh-huh.
uh, 想起来, and you're like, oh shit, things are getting
Yeah.
real. So yeah, there's that language accessibility and
Hmm.
adhering to some assimilation in terms of there were certain conversations that I know we would have loved to hear it in Chinese because then that would have made it more emotional for us because we
Yeah.
know that heritage language versus English. But that again is the experience that again is the Asian American experience of we live in a bilingual, trilingual culture of
Hmm.
we're raised in America, we have to speak English in a certain way, but then we're just bombarded with our heritage language
Hmm.
in such like such like huge ways at home. So it's like our home life and our outside life like clash all the time
Yeah.
because of all these languages and because of these like linguistic like jumblings of
Hmm.
our experience. So like uh I would say like one comparison in terms of content, right, is the animated Mulan, the
Uh-huh.
song I'll Make a Man Out of You, and then Jackie Chan's two versions. Like there's the
Uh-huh.
Cantonese version and the Mandarin version,
Yeah.
and the English version is like Donny Osmond, and we're like, well, whatever. Like,
Uh-huh.
yes, it sounds cool. I'll make a man out of you. But then when you and I heard the Chinese versions sung by Jackie Chan, we're like, yes, this is amazing. Like, superior version of the songs
Oh yeah.
is the Chinese versions. Because there's just certain things that just sound better
Hmm.
to us. There's certain things sound better in Chinese than English.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, definitely. I have to agree on that point that um, like most of the time I think there was no moment where the Chinese didn't make sense, but there were a couple moments that it stuck out to me while watching, not just post. That
Mhm.
like, oh, why are they in English? Like especially with Wenwu,
Uh-huh.
with Sean's dad. I was like, yes, it makes sense that obviously in his like 10,000 years or whatever of life that he's experienced English speaker. But at the same time, there were moments where it's like he's just talking to Shang-Chi, or he's just talking to his kids, or like he doesn't directly reference Katie in any way. Like the dinner is one thing, but the other instances, or like when he's not talking to his subordinates, which are obviously multicultural,
Mhm.
it just didn't make sense why he was speaking in English
Mhm.
when his tongue is Chinese. I could understand it when like Shang Chi starts was like speaking to his dad in English and then he replies in English because that's a code switch thing. Obviously,
Mhm.
Sean has been speaking primarily English for 10 years, so obviously even though he's shown as the superior Chinese speaker because he's a Chinese native, uh, it would make more sense for him to automatically start in English and then have that barrier. But there were times when like Wenwu would start a conversation in English with just Shang-Chi and it didn't make sense. It made sense for the story because obviously it's an American movie. We watched it in an American movie theater. We didn't watch it in China. But
Mhm.
in the film itself, it's like when Shang-Chi and Wenwu are having their face off at the altar and Talo, there should be no English there. Like they should be 100% in Chinese talking to each other because that's their language. That's what they grew up with. Both of them were born in China. Like
Mhm.
there is no English between there should be no English between those two unless it's a conscious choice by
Mhm.
Shang Chi. But yeah, I'm not really convinced about that.
Mm.
So yeah,
Okay.
those were the moments that were really, to me, really like, I don't get
Mhm.
this.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, the use of language there. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. Oh man. I know we had to talk about the Baitong. Like
yeah, we
the
do have to talk about Python.
yeah, yeah, we had to talk about that.
Um, we could
Okay.
do a part two because we've
Yeah.
touched on basically all of the
Mhm.
all of like the real world characters and all
Mhm.
the real world scenes and
Yeah, so then
all
this
the realism elements in this one.
yeah,
So we could do a part two that covers like everything
Talo and
else,
yeah, yeah.
Talo and the mythology
Yeah.
and everything. I think that's probably the best idea. So we
Yeah.
so we don't drone on
Yeah.
for too
Yeah,
long.
I do just like, at least want to acknowledge the this last comment in the chat. So the Michelle Yeoh character, do you think she was married or had children? There were men there and definitely children. What has to do with losing her powers like her sister when she married so I think in the story it was because because Shang-Chi's mom left the village, she had told him when they were making the paper cuttings, she left her magic and she left her magical powers in the village. So
Mm,
she basically chose to live as a mortal, as a human,
right.
versus a mystical being. So that's why she lost her powers. And
Yeah.
then in return, or to parallel that, Shu Wenwu also gave up his powers, which was the Ten Rings.
Yeah.
So Michelle Yeoh's character, whether or not she was married or had children, I think that was irrelevant. It was
Hmm.
just she's the main connecting family figure, a sister of their mother,
Hmm.
that would make her, yeah, when it's a um same sex of the parent, that is a closer tie. Like you're closer to technically in like some anthropological terms of like some families where you are closer to the cousins who share the same sex gender parent. So
Yes.
for example, like with us, right?
Hmm.
We're close to Emily because our dads are brothers.
Yeah.
And we're close to like a Soging Wang because our moms are sisters.
Hmm.
We're closer to those cousins, so it's like same it's like um I think it's called parallel cousins. So parallel
Yes.
cousins are closer to you culturally and like thing because the parents are same-sex siblings.
Mhm.
So I think her presence was just to be that close tie, another maternal figure to stand in the place of their mother that they lost,
Yeah.
and for her to be to welcome them into their village because in traditional Chinese culture, the woman leaves her village
Hmm.
to get married somewhere else, right? To because they're a mystical village, they repopulate in their own way,
Hmm.
and because they're mystical people, they probably have neighboring villages. I don't know, or they all stay
Hmm.
together and they're all incestual, right? Like however many
Yeah.
generations.
Of course.
Um, or they make or there is enough genetic diversity that there isn't incest that they
Hmm.
can marry off, right? But for her, because she was marrying a real outsider, another dimension outsider, she
Yeah.
had to give up her powers. And then Shu Wenwu, in the same vein, also gave up his powers.
Yeah.
So Michelle Yeoh, she didn't need to show that was married or had cousins or had children that would
Hmm.
be their cousins. She was just more the mother figure that they needed and to allow them to return because, you know, I have it right here. Hold on. It's like our like family tree book is
Hmm.
all because my Baitong's right here. So our
Hmm.
family tree book is all male relatives because Chinese culture is still a patriarchal society. All of these people, all of the names is all dudes. It's all men,
Yeah.
all the men, and the women, yes, they are listed, but only male children are listed in terms of who is listed on the family tree.
Hmm.
Women are just vessels for children, you know.
Right.
But yeah,
Yeah.
like all of the men are listed
Hmm.
on this tree, because they are tracing the male line genealogy
Right. Yeah.
versus the women. Therefore, finding matriarchal villages for Chinese Americans is so much harder
Hmm.
than male because male lines are documented in books like these,
Right.
but not female lines. And
Hmm.
I think that is similar to I would say that's similar to Western genealogy too, but because of language access, like because I watch that British genealogy show where they like take British celebrities and like do genealogy
Uh huh.
things. But because like all of their records are either are in Latin languages or in English or French or Scottish, that they
Yeah.
are able to find both genders and both lines of genealogy.
Right.
But for Chinese, because there is just they just choose not to record female names.
Hmm.
So it's harder to find
Yeah.
where the women are. They're
Hmm.
there because they made children, but we may not have their full names.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I think just a quick touching on point for Michelle Yeoh's character that I think it was also very important that she was family to Xialing and Shang-Chi. I think that that ties into the whole cultural thing of how important family is, especially in Asian cultures, but especially as we know from personal experience with Chinese cultures, that even though like Guangbo is like saying, "Oh, I don't care that your mother's from here. You need to go," but having family there is the linchpin that really matters because family is the quintessential importance. Um, and yeah, and there's there's a lot more that we could get into, especially like the family differences, like you said, between the mother's line and the father's line. Um, but we should save that for part two, I guess, because we've got too much to talk about. Because I have plenty of stuff that I still wanted to say, so we'll have to save that for next time. But yeah,
Cool. Yeah, well, thanks everybody for listening. If you haven't watched it, we spoiled a lot for you, or hopefully not. I mean, we talked more about cultural nuances and our own personal experiences and how we felt about the film and how it made us feel. So it was I think this was a pretty emotional review of or emotional rave about the film.
Mhm.
So if you haven't watched it already, then you should watch it. You know, it's still blowing up, for sure in terms of like in terms of like people are rewatching it, like myself. Um, yeah, so I guess stay tuned. Maybe hopefully we can do this again in a couple days, part two, while it's still fresh in our minds. Otherwise, we may just watch it again and then come rant about the rave about the Talo part, definitely, because I think that their exposure and experience in the second half of the film, basically, of being in their mother's village, has
Mhm.
there are even more cultural things in there too.
Oh yeah.
Yes. So yeah, Burple Raccoon 46. Yes, Gracie, let's just watch it again. We'll we'll come back here and talk about the second half of the film.
All right.
Thanks everybody. Good
Thanks
night.
everyone for joining us.